The day my cousin stood up at my grandmother's birthday dinner and told the entire family she had been diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer, I watched 40 people in that room fall completely apart. Aunts grabbed each other, uncles went quiet in the way men go quiet when they don't know what to do with something that size. My grandmother, 78 years old, the woman who had held this family together through every hard thing for 5 decades, put both hands over her mouth and closed her eyes. And my cousin Tamra stood at the head of that table with tears running down her face, and she said, "I didn't want to tell anyone until I knew more, but I can't keep carrying this alone." I believed her. Every single person in that room believed her. I am about to tell you why we shouldn't have, and I am going to tell you about the man who figured it out before any of us were willing to question it. My name is Claudette Marie Fontenot. I am 38 years old and I live in New Orleans, Louisiana, where I was born and where 3 generations of my family have lived before me. We are a big family, loud and close and complicated the way big Southern families tend to be, and Tamra Washington has been my first cousin and, for most of my life, one of my closest friends. I want to tell you who Tamra was before I tell you what she did, because I think it matters. I think you need to understand who this person was to us before you can understand how completely she used that love against us. Tamra is 2 years older than me. We grew up 4 houses apart and spent most of our childhood in and out of each other's homes like they were the same house. She was funny and dramatic and the kind of person who could walk into any room and become the center of it within about 3 minutes. Not in an unkind way. She was genuinely warm, genuinely interested in people, genuinely the cousin you called when something happened, because she would drop everything and be at your door. She was also, though I didn't have this language for it as a child, someone who needed to be needed, someone for whom other people's attention and concern was not just pleasant, but necessary. Not all the time, not obviously, but looking back now, I can see the pattern in ways I couldn't see it when I was living inside it. A minor illness that became a major crisis in the telling, a difficult situation that was always somehow more difficult than it appeared from the outside, a talent for placing herself at the center of whatever was happening, not maliciously, or at least not in a way that felt malicious, but instinctively, the way some people orient toward warmth without being fully aware they're doing it. I tell you this not to judge her, I tell you this because it is the context without which none of what happened makes complete sense. Tamra announced her cancer at my grandmother's 78th birthday dinner on a Saturday night in March. The whole family was there. My grandmother's 4 children, their spouses, all of the grandchildren, a few great-grandchildren running around the edges of everything. It was one of those evenings that feels abundant before anything happens, the kind of family gathering where you look around and feel the specific gratitude of being part of something that has held together. And then Tamra stood up. She said she had been having symptoms for several months: fatigue, bloating, pelvic pain. She had finally gone to a doctor who had referred her to a specialist, and the specialist had told her it was stage 3 ovarian cancer. She would need to begin chemotherapy as soon as possible. She was scared. She didn't want to face it alone. The room changed instantly. 40 people who had been happy a moment earlier were suddenly frightened and reaching for each other and reaching for her. My grandmother was crying. My aunt, Tamra's mother, had gone completely white. The family mobilized the way our family mobilizes, immediately and completely. Within days, a meal train had been organized. My aunt took unpaid leave from her job at the school district. A GoFundMe had been started by one of Tamra's friends from church, and our family had contributed thousands of dollars in the first week alone. I want to pause here and tell you what those 4 months looked like, because the length of it matters, the way the lie had time to settle into every corner of our family's life before anyone thought to question it. Week 1, the shock, the phone calls, the meal train being organized on a group chat at 11 o'clock at night. Week 2, my aunt at Tamra's house every day, my grandmother calling her 3 times a day, cousins and uncles who had never been particularly close finding themselves suddenly and urgently connected. Week 3, Tamra posting on social media about her journey, receiving hundreds of messages from people across our church and neighborhood and the long network of our family's history in this city. Week 4 through week 16, chemotherapy appointments that nobody attended because Tamra said she preferred to go alone. Side effects that came and went. Some weeks she seemed exhausted, some weeks almost normal, which she explained as the unpredictable nature of treatment. A timeline that kept shifting in ways nobody questioned because none of us were doctors and we didn't know what questions to ask. I contributed. I drove over twice that first week with food and I sat with Tamra while she cried about what she was facing. I held her hand. I told her we were going to get through this together. I meant every word. I had been engaged for 7 months at the time. My fiancé, Dr. Elijah Carter, is an oncologist at Tulane Medical Center. He has been practicing for 12 years. He has sat beside hundreds of patients and their families in the moment of diagnosis. He knows what this disease looks like, what it takes from people, how it moves, how treatment works, what the timeline of stage 3 ovarian cancer actually is. He knows it the way only someone who has lived inside it professionally for over a decade can know it. When I told him about Tamra's diagnosis that first week, he listened to everything I said. He asked a few questions: how she was doing, what the treatment plan was, whether she had a good support team around her. He was compassionate. He was concerned. He said to let him know if there was anything he could do. And then, 3 weeks later, as the family support intensified and the GoFundMe grew and the meal train extended another month into the future, he asked me quietly one evening, "What oncologist is she seeing?" I said I didn't know. He said to find out. I asked Tamra the following week, casually, over the phone, as if it were a normal question. I said Elijah wanted to know because he had colleagues who specialized in ovarian cancer and might be able to help. She gave me a name without hesitating: Dr. Patricia Moore at a clinic on the west side of the city. Elijah looked up Dr. Patricia Moore that evening. He started with the clinic Tamra had named, then moved to the Louisiana State Medical Board Physician Registry, then to the National Oncology Certification databases, then to the hospital credentialing networks he had access to through his work at Tulane. He came and found me in the kitchen about an hour later. He sat down across from me and he said, "Claudette, there is no oncologist named Patricia Moore at that clinic. There is no oncologist named Patricia Moore registered with the Louisiana Medical Board. There is no oncologist by that name in the National Registry." I said, "Are you sure? Maybe the spelling is different." He said, "I searched every variation. Patricia Moore, Pat Moore, P. Moore. I went through every oncology practice in the greater New Orleans area. That name does not exist in any of them." I said, "Could she be new? Could she not be listed yet?" He said, "A physician cannot practice oncology in Louisiana without being registered. That registration is not optional. There is no version of this where she exists and isn't findable." I sat with that for 3 days. I want you to understand what those 3 days felt like. Not just suspicion, something more disorienting than suspicion. Something that didn't have a clean name because the mind resists naming it when the person in question is someone you have loved for 36 years. When someone has been part of your life since you were 2 years old, when you have shared childhoods and graduations and funerals and Christmases, and the ordinary accumulated weight of decades of being family, the idea that they are lying to you about something this enormous does not sit easily anywhere in the mind or the body. It feels wrong in a physical way, like a note played out of tune. So the mind looks for another explanation. It always does. Maybe Elijah had the spelling wrong. Maybe the doctor practiced under a different name professionally. Maybe the clinic was new and hadn't updated their registration yet. Maybe there was some administrative gap, some unusual circumstance that explained why a real physician wasn't appearing in any database. I cycled through every alternative I could construct. I put them down and picked them back up. I made dinner and folded laundry and answered work emails, and kept coming back to it at 2 in the morning when everything else was quiet. I could not find a version of it that resolved into something innocent. On the second night, I lay awake and thought about Tamra's face at that birthday dinner, the way she had looked when she stood up, the tears, the way her voice had broken on the word alone. I had thought in that moment that I was watching someone find the courage to tell a terrible truth. I had been watching someone find the courage to tell a carefully constructed lie, and I had believed every second of it. On the fourth day, I called Elijah at his office. I said, "Is there any way this could be a misunderstanding?" He said, "There is one way to know for certain." He explained it carefully. If Tamra was genuinely a stage 3 ovarian cancer patient in active chemotherapy, documentation existed: lab results, chemotherapy administration records, prescription records, insurance claims, a paper trail that is unavoidable when someone is actually receiving cancer treatment. He could not access her records without her consent, but if she would agree to share them or to allow him to speak with her treatment team, the truth would be visible within 24 hours. I called Tamra that evening. I told her Elijah wanted to help, that he had contacts at Tulane who might be able to offer her access to additional specialists, but that to do that, he needed to review her current records and speak with whoever was managing her care. There was a pause before she answered. She said, "My records are with my doctor." I said, "Of course. We just need your permission to contact them directly. Elijah would handle everything. You wouldn't have to do anything at all." Another pause. Longer. She said, "I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that. It feels like a lot of people getting involved in something very personal." I kept my voice even. I said, "We're trying to get you better care, Tamra. That's all this is." She said she would think about it and call me tomorrow. She did not call me tomorrow. She did not call the day after that. On the third day, I called her and she didn't answer. She texted back 2 hours later and said she had been resting and having a hard week, and could we please talk soon. I knew then. I think I had known for several days, but knowing something and being prepared to act on it are two completely different things, and I was still searching for the door that led somewhere other than where I could see this was going. Elijah sat with me that night, and he said, "I have worked with patients who are in denial about treatment. I have worked with patients who are terrified of involving additional doctors. What I have not encountered is a stage 3 cancer patient actively refusing to allow any verification of her diagnosis when someone is trying to provide her with better care." He said it gently, but he said it clearly. I said, "What do we do?" He said, "I think you already know." I drove to Tamra's house on a Sunday afternoon. I brought food out of habit. 4 months of bringing food had made it completely automatic, my hands doing it without my mind's involvement. I knocked. She let me in. We hugged. She looked tired, which she always looked these days, which I was now seeing differently than I had been seeing it for months. I sat down at her kitchen table. She sat across from me. We talked for a few minutes about ordinary things, her mother, the weather, something that had happened at a cousin's house, the way you talk when you are circling something you haven't said yet. And then I said it. Tamra, I need you to show me one thing from your doctor, anything, a prescription label, a lab result, an appointment confirmation, anything with your name and a diagnosis on it. I am not asking for your whole file. I am asking for one piece of paper. She looked at me for a long moment. I watched something move through her expression, a calculation of some kind, a consideration of options, and then she looked at the table. I said, I'm not here to hurt you. I am here because I love you, and I need to understand what is happening. She was quiet for a very long time, long enough that I could hear the refrigerator running in the kitchen behind me, long enough that I started to wonder if she was going to say anything at all. And then she said, very quietly, I got scared. I waited. She said, I had the symptoms. I went to a doctor. They said there were some things they wanted to look at more closely, and I panicked. I told Mama, and she reacted the way she reacted, and it kept going, and I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know how to go back. I said, So you don't have cancer? She said, There was never a confirmed diagnosis. There were some tests they wanted to run, but no, I don't have cancer. I sat with that. The thing about a lie that has been running for 4 months is that by the time it collapses, the damage is distributed across every person who believed it. My grandmother had been praying every night. My aunt had rearranged her entire life. People in our family had given money they did not have easily to give, real sacrifices made out of genuine love and genuine fear for a crisis that had never existed. I said, Tamara, do you understand what you have done to this family? She was crying by then. She said, I know. I don't know how it got this far. I never meant for it to go this far. I said, I am going to give you 1 week. 1 week to call every person in this family yourself and tell them the truth. If you don't do it in 1 week, I will do it for you. She said, Claudette, please, you don't know how they'll react. I said, You should have thought about that before you let Grandma cry herself to sleep over you for 4 months. I stood up. I left the food on her table, and I walked out. Reflectively, she did not call anyone in that week. I waited the full 7 days because I had told her I would. On the 8th day, I called my aunt. That was the hardest phone call I have ever made, not because I didn't know what I was going to say, because I knew exactly what I was going to say, and I knew what it was going to do to the person on the other end of the line. My aunt had given more than anyone: unpaid leave, daily visits, weeks of sitting with her daughter through what she believed were the effects of chemotherapy that was never being administered. She went silent when I told her, and then she said, Are you certain? I said, Elijah verified everything. There is no doctor, no clinic, no records in any database anywhere, and I confronted Tamara directly. She admitted it. My aunt said, I need to go. She hung up. The truth moved through the family the way truth moves through families, not all at once, but steadily, changing shape slightly with each telling, arriving differently in each living room and each phone call, but keeping its essential weight intact. Tamara did not come to family gatherings for the rest of that year. My aunt barely spoke to her for 6 months. The GoFundMe was closed, and what remained was returned. The conversations about what had happened went on for a long time, in kitchens and parking lots and after Sunday service, the way family conversations do when something has happened that doesn't resolve quickly. My grandmother's reaction was the one I had dreaded most. She had prayed every single night for 4 months. She had told me more than once that she was asking God to spare Tamara, that she couldn't bear to lose a grandchild before she went herself. When my aunt finally told her the truth, she went very quiet for a long time. My aunt said she sat with her for an hour in her living room and they barely spoke. And then my grandmother said, "Why would she do that to us? Why would she do that to me?" There was no clean answer to that question. There still isn't. The closest I have come to an answer after 2 years of thinking about it is that Tamara did it because it worked, because the fear and the attention and the love that flooded in when she made that announcement at the birthday dinner was exactly what some part of her had been looking for without knowing how to ask for it any other way. That is not an excuse. I want to be clear about that. Understanding something is not the same as excusing it. What she did caused real harm to real people who loved her, harm that didn't disappear when the truth came out, but changed shape into something that our family has had to carry and work through in the years since. I want to be honest with you about what I felt during all of it, because the anger was real. Of course it was. She had manipulated people I love. She had taken money and time and energy and peace of mind from people who gave it all freely, out of love, believing it was real. But underneath the anger was grief. Not for the cousin I had thought I was losing to cancer. That grief dissolved the moment the truth came out. Grief for the version of Tamara I had trusted for 36 years. Grief for the simplicity of believing I knew someone completely. Grief for the friendship that had been the frame for so much of my life, and that now had to be understood differently. Elijah and I got married 8 months after everything came out. Tamara was not there. That was my decision, and I stand by it. Some ruptures need time before they can find their way back to something between. It has been 2 years. Tamara and I are not what we were. I don't know if we ever will be what we were. But we have spoken. We have been in the same room and found ways to be present with each other that are honest, even if they are not easy. She is in therapy now, her mother told me, and I am genuinely glad for that. What she did came from somewhere deep and old and painful, and I hope she is finding her way to understanding it. My grandmother forgave her. She announced it at Easter dinner, the way my grandmother announces things, simply, without drama, as if the matter had been settled and there was nothing more to discuss. She said, "I forgive Tamara. What she did was wrong, and she knows that, but she is still my grandchild, and I am not going to spend whatever time I have left carrying this." She is 80 years old. She is still the strongest person I know. I have thought a lot about what this experience taught me, about what it means when someone has learned somewhere along the way that crisis is the most reliable method for making the people around them stop and pay attention, about the ways families can enable that pattern without realizing it, by responding to every distress signal with such immediacy and such love that the signal itself becomes the only tool that works. I'm not saying every crisis is manufactured. The vast majority of people who struggle are struggling genuinely and need exactly the support their families give. Please hear me on that. But I am saying this. Love does not require you to stop thinking. Love does not require you to suspend your judgment entirely in order to prove that it is real. You can care deeply about someone, you can love them with everything you have, and still say quietly and privately and with all the gentleness in the world, "Help me understand, show me, let me in enough to see." That is not suspicion, that is not cruelty.
That is the kind of love that is honest enough to look clearly at the person it loves and ask to be let all the way in. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Zuri Chronicles, because every day we come back here and tell another truth, another family trying to find its way through something hard. My name is Zuri, and I'll see you next time.